morning, good morning, good morning. You are here for another episode of the Board Watch. My name is Robert Dashiell. I'm here with my colleague Hassan Barnes. And first, let me apologize to you for not giving you a heads up that we weren't going to be here last week. I was out of town, and as was Hassan, and I simply forgot to mention that during our last broadcast, so we do apologize. Also, let me acknowledge the several suggestions that we received for the renaming of the program. As if you recall, I said last week that because necessarily we touched upon issues that were much broader than simply the Board of Estimates actions in Baltimore City, we were looking for a title that more accurately described the breadth of what we were actually discussing. We received several suggestions, but I have to ask your help again because we received so many suggestions. We frankly can't decide on which one. So I'm going to kick your memory now for those of you who are old enough, if you to recall a program called "Look at It This Way." That was a 60s program. The hosts were then the most worshipful Grand Master of Prince Hall Mason, Samuel T. Daniels, Homer Faber, who was then the chair, I think, of the Morgan State University Political Science Department, and Vernon Dobson, the venerable former pastor of the Union Baptist Church. From time to time, Gus Adair, who was also in the Political Science Department, was a featured co-host as well. In any event, I'm asking you to consider whether or not we ought to implement or use the title "Look at It This Way" for this program going forward. You can send your comments to me or Hassan in the chat box, or contact us by phone at some point. I also want to ask you, viewers, to regularly review the agenda that's published for the Board of Estimates and let us know if you see something in the agenda that you don't understand or would like us to dig into to provide additional information, so we can do that. We're still in the growing phase. We're still in the learning phase. But one thing we want to do is be informative, be relevant, and be helpful particularly to small and minority businesses that want to try to help figure out how to navigate through the troubled waters that we find ourselves in. Hassan, good morning.
Good morning, Bob. How are you doing this morning?
All right. My understanding is you want to start off today talking about this thing called tariffs.
Yeah, so I've had a lot of clients reach out to me recently based on Donald Trump, the Trump administration's tariffs on everything, want to know what a tariff is and how it affects them. As we have small business clients, it may affect them, it may not, it may be much more gradual. First thing I'll say, a tariff. People assume a tariff is a tax on another country. That isn't quite true. A tariff is the government levying a tax on imported goods. So example of that, I'll do a basic example. Say you had a company and you were selling concrete. And you were selling concrete in Baltimore City. And then you had a company from India sell concrete in Baltimore City. And you had a store here, and they opened a shop next to you and had a store here. And they were competing with you. You may go to the mayor and say, hey, Mayor Brandon Scott, I can't sell and make a profit because the other company came in. So Mayor Brandon Scott may say, okay, I'll put a tariff on them. I'll charge them $1 extra for every bag of concrete they sell. That $1 extra is a tariff. It's a tax on goods from another place to be sold in this place. So the reality is, the person who's paying the tariff is the person who's bringing the duties in, who's bringing the actual goods in. So when an Indian company bring it in, they want to sell it here in Baltimore City, they will have a tariff of $1 per bag. And when the tariff happens, what happens is that means their costs go up. That means the consumer can choose, am I going to pay $1 more per bag, or am I going to pay $1 less per bag? Well, most consumers, they assume, will choose the lower amount. So the tariff doesn't prevent business. What it does is it makes the cost of business higher. Because when businesses have a supply chain, they sell items, they sell based on their current numbers. A tariff add numbers on top of that. So what do businesses do? They push it down to the consumer. That means you'll pay more. The concern is because of the tariffs, there will be possibly recession, there'll be a pullback, it'll be higher prices. But that's how tariffs work. There could be good things, there could be bad things. I wanted to give a list. I know in the news there have been a lot of tariffs, a lot of talking about tariffs, and the way our administration Donald Trump administration talks about it, they talk about it in a different way than how they actually work. But I was going through to try to see when did they start doing tariffs and when and when did we start hearing about them. So I have a list here. February 1st, Donald Trump signed the order for a 25% tariff on all imports from Canada and Mexico. February 3rd, he did another tariff, he delayed the tariff, indicating, hey, I'm going to do a tariff, but give me a minute. Let's see whether China, Mexico, and Canada will do what I say do. Mm-hmm. And if so, we may hold back on the tariffs. March 4th, he had another tariffs. And that one, it wasn't quite clear to me what he did on March 4th, but he issued additional tariffs on March 4th. Then he issued tariffs on China, February 1st. He did a 10% tariff on all Chinese goods. And on March 4th, he did another tariff where he increased the tariff from 10% to 20%. He did a tariff on March 12th for steel. He did a tariff on March 26th for automobiles. That's the one we're hearing about more recently. Import of automobiles as well as actual supplies for automobiles. And on February 13th, he did a reciprocal tariff, which means he did tariffs for other countries who did tariffs on us. So he's had a list of tariffs. March 24th, he had another tariff for 25% tariffs on oil from Venezuela. So the Trump administration has been on a tariff spree, and I see this as their way to say we're doing something. We're moving the needle. Now, I don't think people have asked for it. I don't know any American citizen saying, hey, we got a tariff Venezuelan oil. I don't see the American people saying, hey, we got tariff Canada because they're getting over us. What they've done is they've used emergency power based on the idea there's a fentanyl crisis in the country. So they're using the idea that fentanyl is a scourge in the country, and as a result, the administration must take action. Hence the tariffs on Mexico and Canada and China is based on fentanyl. Now, it seemed like a stretch, but the administration is using that as a precursor for we have these powers and these rights under emergency status because of the fentanyl crisis. No one has questioned it. No one has even have put the two together. He says it in passing, but no one has talked about it really. The reality is, have we seen the fentanyl crisis, and do these tariffs go after that? I don't think they do. I think the tariffs go. If you're putting tariffs on automobiles, I don't know how that affects fentanyl. Now, typically, you do a tariff for a couple of reasons. It could be protectionist. You may do it to protect your own domestic industry. Well, for the automobiles, it doesn't make sense because a lot of the manufacturers use supplies out of the country. So they'll be affected by tariffs as well, whether it's GM, whether it's Ford. A lot of them have factories in Mexico. So when you say tariffs, they'll be affected as well. It could be to spur innovation and what's going to happen is what I see, and you may have a different idea about this, and I'm telling my clients this. The administration is doing what they think is reasonable for their agenda, and we don't know what that is. Right? They're bullying other countries around for the purpose that we're not quite sure, because they haven't been transparent to the American people. So for my clients who are in business and trying to figure out, hey, Hassan, how do I navigate the tariffs? My only answer to them is, we don't know yet. It's going to be a while. As much as he put tariffs on and take tariffs off, we're not sure what's going to happen. Give it a minute. We will know, we do know that prices will increase. We do know the economy will slow because we have certainly federal employees getting fired every day. We have companies laying people off, and we have things getting more expensive. So we will see a pullback. So the concern for my clients is, how do I maintain? It's not a direct hit to my clients for the tariffs. It's an indirect hit. The actual economy is getting slower, which means businesses will slow up, and any contract they get may be deferred. I was talking to a colleague of mine at a government contractor, and I was asking them, "Oh, are you guys doing well?" His response was, "No, we're not doing well because of the tariffs. We have more companies that have canceled orders with us because they're afraid for the economy." So that sentiment, the actual sentimentality of seeing the tariffs in action has made businesses pull back on revenue and pull back on sales, which is how we go to a recession. So what I've been advising my clients are, depending on what area of business you are, certainly put some money aside, have some money set aside in case money for revenue and overhead and payroll, and still go after and try to work your way to get things done. But we'll see the results of tariff in the next 6 months, 9 months. It won't be immediate.
All right, let me try to see if I understand what you just said. First, what a tariff is. As I understand you to say, a tariff is basically a tax.
Yes,
it's a tax
Paid by the consumer typically.
That
paid by the person.
A tax that is paid
Yeah.
by the end user, which means the consumer.
Yes.
So that it is not a tax. It is not a fee paid by a foreign government. It's not a
so
tax.
When Trump administration say we put the tariff on China, that's not quite accurate. China isn't paying a dime towards the tariffs. The tariffs are being paid by the person who bringing the item in. So say we are doing tariff on automobiles, and you have a car from Japan. Say you have a Toyota. Well, the person paying the tariff will be Toyota when they get to the country, but guess who pays that? No, you pay that. They want every single dime that's been attached to them. They're going to give it to you in terms of the price of vehicles. Hence, about a few months back, they'll suggest the car may go by 15%. They already know the price went up. It's not a question whether Toyota going to pay it. They know, the American consumer paying for it, and here's how much they're going to pay for it per car.
And I hear you say that as the purchasing by consumers goes, so goes the economy. If you force consumers to change their buying habits or their buying patterns, you simultaneously, perhaps inadvertently, but you simultaneously change the whole structure of the economy, because it affects employment, it affects the jobs, it affects the size and the growth plans of businesses. It affects everything. It's not a simple phenomenon. It's not like any other tax that might be, because for example, if you're in the business, as many minority companies are, of supplying certain goods and materials, and that's your business, you're a supplier. Well, your source may be a foreign country. Your source could be Canada. Your source could be Mexico, Germany, whatever. Well, if you have to pay at the wholesale level this more because of the tariff, then that means you pass that cost on. Now, to the extent that your market can't absorb that task, you got to lay people off. You've got to you've got to change your plans for sustaining your business, if you got to change your plans for maintaining your business.
So I've seen some, to that point, I've seen some projections for, in terms of maintaining the business, for the auto tariffs. They project a million less cars sold.
Yeah.
So when you say you make plans to maintain your business, big companies already know how many fewer things they're going to sell. When you buy things, whether it's concrete, whether it's cars, you buy it based on the funds you have. For example, that's COVID. During COVID, the cost of supplies went up. Lumber went up, drywall went up, nails went up. But guess what? People had more money, so they were able to buy and continue. Yeah. Now the costs are going up, and people have less money. Yeah. So they will be able directly to buy less. And the economists and the people who do projections already know how much less they're going to pay. If you got $40,000 to pay for a car, you know what car you want. You want the brand new car, costs $40,000, and you go to the dealership, it's $55,000. What you doing? You turn around and walking out. You say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake."
Yeah, well, one of the fundamental problems that we have in understanding the Trump tariffs is that more often than not, too often, the factual predicate for the imposition of the tariff is a complete falsehood. For example, you mentioned the tariff on Canadian goods that was supposedly in response to or to reduce the trafficking in fentanyl. Well, the study that I've seen said that the amount of fentanyl that's coming across the Canadian border wouldn't fill a carry-on bag on an airplane. So we're not. So the idea, the premise that by imposing a tariff on Canada, we're somehow impacting or affecting that's justified because of the reduction in fentanyl is completely specious. It's just not true. And that's really the problem with this administration. In my opinion, anyway, you would like to be able to, as a consumer, as a citizen, you would like to be able to trust and as true the information that's being provided to you by the government, by the people in power who should know. But the fact of the matter is, this regime, if you will say and do anything to please the King Trump. And so you simply can't rely. We've got a situation with the leak of the plans for the attack on the Houthi in Yemen. It was obvious that someone added the phone number of a journalist, which allowed that journalist to participate in an online chat, which gave specific details, time, place, the munitions, and so forth with respect to that attack. Now that's highly classified information, but the Trump administration one, disputes that is classified, which is ludicrous, and secondly, that it was important enough so that the journalist that it really didn't matter. But rather than simply have someone say, "Look, we made a mistake. It was inadvertent. It was unintended, and we ought to do something about it." But you can't say anything against Trump, and which is we see it on college campuses now. You got Marco Rubio asserting that it's okay to revoke the visas of students because they quote lied to get here. Well, what was the lie? The lie what lie did they tell to get here? Did the lie is the expression of a sentiment, whatever it may be, that that Trump doesn't want expressed, at least not expressed in a public forum, and that to me it represents a very dangerous situation for America.
So let me say this and go back to the issue in Yemen and the Houthi. We had a campaign to bomb the Houthis in Yemen, and what I want people to realize is this is about business. Certainly, the reason they bombed the Houthi in Yemen was because.
Excuse me 1 second.
Certainly, Bob. I'll continue. The reason they bombed was because, as many of you guys may know, there's been discord in that part of the world, to the point where shipping ships from Europe and Asia to go around versus going through. So they go around to avoid the I don't know what they call pirates, but they go around the continent versus going through. And so the goal was to open up shipping lanes. So the U.S. government decided to go after the Houthi to open up shipping lanes and to push back. And what we saw on that chat was J.D. Vance in particular was saying, we don't think we should do it. We bailing the Europeans out because their ships are the ones that has to go around, and they're the ones benefiting from it. In fact, if they wanted to get it straight, let them go in there and do it. To which point, I think Herseg responded, only people in the world can do it as us. No one else in the world has the ability to do it. Now, I don't necessarily put much stock in with what Herseg says. I don't know that he has all the information, I would say, but they were under the impression only we can go in. And the purpose of going in was strictly for business, to open up shipping lanes so that, in fact, it'll be cheaper and faster to get ships back to the United States for commerce. So again, for all our clients, the government and administration oftentimes do things for the purpose of business and shipping, in a way, not shipping, for business in a way that we don't always understand or take advantage of. But quite often, when government do things, it's for business purposes. Now, as far as college campuses and the animus towards students, we've only seen this for one issue, and this is the issue of the student protests in Palestine and the genocide that's happening over in Palestine. We haven't seen it for another issue. When they're protesting all kind of things, we don't see them. When they're protesting conservatives, we don't see them losing their citizenship. Only for this one issue. There's been a concerted effort to stop dissent, to stop the argument that Israel is killing people in the Middle East and that the U.S. government is supporting them. So because to stop that, they're trying to kill dissent. Historically, in this country, we've allowed college campuses to be a place of thought and debate and discussion. The fact that they want to silence that. Now, they haven't been able to deport American citizens, but the next best thing, if you're Asian American or Middle Eastern American, we can find a way to get rid of you. They will, and they have. They've been going after people who are here legally because they've been protesting. They've been saying things bad about the U.S. government and about Israel in a way that should be our bigger argument. The big argument is free speech claims. If we're saying we're a country of free speech, and you can say anything you want to anybody, you can argue about the president. You can go on live and say, I hate the president. I think he's a bad president. They did it for Biden. They did it for Clinton. They did it for Obama. They did it for Trump at first administration.
Well, Trump does it every day with respect to judges. He calls them left lunatics.
But the idea that a college student can't say, I'm protesting another country that's over the top and beyond the pale, and it's contrary to our democracy in a way that in my lifetime I haven't seen it. Certainly, this country has done many things. I haven't seen that kind of behavior in my life. The stance that if you are in dissent about what's going on, and there's no question about the UN. They're very clear about what's going on with the Palestinians in Palestine and the depravity and the sheer extent of the murder, the killing, and it's been well documented. So the fact that students are being deported for it and being punished for it is amazing. But beyond that, you talk about the students in they're going even further. They are forcing universities to get rid of their DEI initiatives. DEI, for people on live on stream, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. It means programs in place to remedy historic wrongs based on race and or gender. Because the Trump administration is averse to that, they're going out their way to change policies across the country with little pushback. The universities have been pretty much falling in line. Now, I don't know whether their legal department has told them, hey, we have no choice in the matter. We give too much government funds. If they stop government funds, we won't exist anymore as an entity, or whether they believe that there should be no DEI. The reality is, and I'm African American, the reality is the reason for DEI for my community, the reason is still there, right? The historic injustices and historic disparities still exist. And although there has been a push toward DEI and a push towards getting some level of equity, we haven't seen it. We haven't seen equity in terms of lower level schools. Schools in Black communities typically are still one race schools. They still have poor performances, and we still see Black in this country typically are lower middle class or poor, and we can trace those issues directly back to slavery and Jim Crow and other issues we had. So the reason for DEI still exists, but they're pushing back on places where, so in most communities, most diverse communities, whether immigrants or African Americans, education is the best way to realize higher gains in employment and better stability for your family. They're pushing back in areas where you want people to go to college. You want people to have environments where they can grow the way they think and learn and develop their communities. You want that. They're pushing back and saying, no, we don't want that.
Well, the elimination of DEI, and in a minute I'm going to ask you what your take is on the executive order that requires the Smithsonian, the National Museum of African American History, part of the Smithsonian Museum enterprise, that they delete or reduce or get rid of all of the exhibits and not put up any additional exhibits that talk about the race relations that reflect the history, the true history of the country as it relates to the treatment of American Blacks. Trump has signed an executive order directing the Smithsonian to delete all of that. They signed the executive order to delete, even in the military, references to Black folks. And it's because we got to focus in. The real attack, it seems to me, is against Black people. There is that Trump and Elon Musk have determined that the next generation of white people will not be subjected to anything from any part of history which would suggest that there is an ongoing and continuing obligation to American Blacks, or that this country somehow mistreated American Blacks and has not made sufficient recompense for that mistreatment. Anything that suggests that there's still a debt is to be eliminated, and the way to do that is to eliminate the history that reflects the nature of the obligation itself, which brings us, to me, brings into focus the concept of reparation. There's just no way around it, and because the reality of it is, although the deletion of DEI was based upon the premise that DEI meant less competent, the beneficiaries of so-called DEI programs and minority business programs, quite frankly, haven't been American Blacks at all. The primary beneficiaries of so-called DEI programs and minority business programs have been companies owned by or that are purportedly owned by white women. And the individuals who have been hired under DEI have been women, a majority of whom have been white. So it's not, so even though it's been promoted and Trump's base, the MAGA base, cheered it on, thinking that it was the ending of a preference for people that they never thought should have a preference anyway, i.e. Black people. The reality of it is that the majority of the pain, although not proportionately, but the majority of the pain from his actions is being felt by the very people who put him in office.
So let me attack that and address that. So I heard this morning about his order for the Smithsonian, and so the Smithsonian is the America's, I guess, version of the idea to keep culture. So we have Smithsonian all across the country. In DC, it's the Smithsonian, the mall is museums, back to back, whether it's Air and Space Museum, which I love, Natural History Museum, which I love.
Like Schoenberg in New York.
Yeah, so and so even up and down up the East Coast of the country, we have Smithsonian museums. And where you go, Smithsonian is basically the keeper of culture, right? They keep record of culture and record of history in the country in a way that's been very expensive, in a way that many other countries envy. You go to the Air and Space Museum, they do it in a way where it's very clear to young people, but it's almost like in antiquity. We talk about the museum in Alexandria in antiquity, where they had huge museums in other countries and libraries where other countries where it was all the repository of all the knowledge of that country. Our Smithsonians do that. The culture that we see there. So we have in recent years the Museum of African American History, which is a museum about African American history, and the history has been brutal. The history of slavery, the history of depravity, history of Jim Crow, but also of resilience. Mm-hmm. All those things are one race. When it was slavery, blacks were slaves. That's the nature of black folks in this country now. Certainly we have immigrants who are black, but the majority of people in this country were slaves. Same way they were in Brazil, same way they were in the Caribbean. They were slaves, and that's the history of the country. You can't run from it. What you're seeing is, and there's been a push with the whole thing of DEI, the whole thing of affirmative action, the whole thing of anything that deals with the idea that blacks should get something, or we should recognize that at some point there was a horrible situation, has been seen as offensive. There's been arguments that when you teach things about racism and slavery, it makes people who are not black feel guilty, and that's wrong. Well, certainly being a slave is wrong. I'm sure people felt more than guilty. So they've been doing things, and it's a cultural thing. They've been doing things to kind of ameliorate the idea that blacks in this country don't get a fair shake, that it's equal for them as if it's for everyone else. And it's hard for us sitting here. You and I both are attorneys, and we have more education than most people in the country. Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. We have more education than the average person in the country. It does not mean that writ large, the majority of blacks have the same access to education that you and I may have had. In fact, it's very clear, and the government keeps their own numbers, and their numbers are pretty good. Blacks don't have the same access to education at lower levels, elementary school, middle school, high school, across the board. And I'm from Baltimore City, and we've seen the numbers and the records in Baltimore where the level of education in some schools in Baltimore have been horrendous. And these are almost all black schools. And it's not only Baltimore, it's across the country. When they go out their way to try to restrict and redact, and even purposely go into government and say, hey, military, we want no references of Tuskegee Airmen. We want no references of anybody black in the military. Colin Powell, get rid of that. We don't want to talk about Colin Powell. They are purposely saying we want to subvert the contributions that blacks made to this country. We talk about Black History and Black History Month that was in February. Black history is American history. It may be from a black perspective. This country wouldn't be this country without the contributions of people who like me and who like you. But when you try to erase it, you're saying, hey, I'm pushing back on that. The reason the AA program is in trouble, and the reason my clients are asking me, hey, is it even worthwhile to get an MBE certificate? Because at some point, there won't be any funds available for any minority businesses. The reason that they have MBEs is to help us, but they're saying basically now there's no value in identifying minorities. And so if that's the case, how do we proceed and do well as businesses? And that's the question. So with all these attacks, and you say affirmative action, at this point with this administration, it's a no-go. The people, so not only the administration, I want to be clear, not only the administration speaks for a population in the community who for a long time have been silent. They felt how they felt, and they had their views. They didn't say anything because they didn't feel it open. They're open now. They're openly saying how they feel in a way that hasn't been pushed back. We have liberal media who basically have fallen in line and started firing employees because they're too liberal. We've had liberal politicians who are basically doing what the administration says do without any pushback. And these are people who we thought were lions and people who are lions in politics and in media to help push the issue of getting equity for our kind of people, and they've laid down in a way that's been astonishing.
Well, it's interesting. I recall back in mid to late 70s when Maryland's MBE program was adopted first in the Department of Transportation and then subsequently statewide. I recall having a lively discussion, a heated discussion with a then Baltimore City senator, Robert Douglas, who used to own a company many years ago. It's gone out of business now, called Baltimore Electronics. And I remember Douglas and I arguing about who was going to be a minority, who's going to be identified as a minority for the purpose of the minority business program. The impotence for the program was, of course, black contractors, because it was coming right on the eve of the beginning of the construction of the Baltimore subway system. And so black contractors wanted to get a piece of the action, wanted part of the money and the opportunity that huge investment was going to generate. Uh, uh, Senator Douglas at the time said, well, if we don't include other categories of other people within the definition of minority, we're not going to get, it's not going to pass. My response was, well, look, if black people aren't going to get the benefit of it, then who needs it in the first place? But the irony of it is, it's because of the inclusion of other groups that's been used to dilute the interest in the claim of black people, so much so that Chief Justice Roberts and some of his colleagues in the Harvey case said, look, you can no longer base a race-based program on the elimination of societal discrimination, because it's unquantifiable, that we don't know where it began and we don't know where it ends. So the inclusion, the irony of it is that the inclusion of these other groups ultimately led to the demise of what we were told to be affirmative action. It led to the demise of it. So that what we're left with as black people is a claim that is only ours. We're the only ones that were forcibly brought here and made slaves. We're the only ones from whose property and assets were taken, whether it's the bodily selves from Henrietta Lacks, or the theft of other intellectual property, or even indeed the theft of our physical labor. We under the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment, I gave you a little bit of legalese here. Under the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment, no one is supposed to be deprived of their property without two things: due process and just compensation. The fact of the matter is, as a group, American black people have never been, that debt has never been repaid. Now, that doesn't mean that there haven't been those among us who succeeded, because one thing, as my grandmother used to say, we know how to make do. We know how to make, and in fact, the real history will show that whenever we've been left alone without any assistance from the other communities, we've been able not just to succeed, but in fact to thrive. There were black Wall Streets all across the country. They weren't created by government grants. They weren't subsidized by government funding. They were communities that were based upon black people acknowledgement of one thing: we all we got. And so we had our own doctors, we had our own lawyers, we had our own stores, but they were destroyed. But then the white community through Jim Crow destroyed those because of that independence. Because under the 13th Amendment, that abolished slavery, the caveat was unless you are in jail or so. So whenever we've demonstrated our ability to succeed without them, our institutions have been under attack. We've been bombed. We've been killed. And so what that created was then a so-called civil rights. What that led to was a civil rights movement, which wasn't based upon a declaration or demand by black folk for repayment of the debt, but was based upon the principle that assumed that white folk were in charge and would remain that way, but had a moral obligation to take care of us.
Well, one, I wasn't there, so I'm a few years too young to be there. I don't think the idea of the civil rights movement was they take care of us. I think the idea was the idea that we're not an inferior race of human beings, right? So all of the charges were we're being treated in a way where we're less than, and that was the history of this country. Blacks were slaves, and they were in law, ratified law. They were less than a human being in law, but in practice, they were treated differently. I was watching.
Well, don't forget Dred Scott. Now 3/5 of a man.
Yes,
Yes,
in law, it was codified that they weren't a human being. They didn't have the ability to redress the courts. I think it was a landmark case during the Salem witch trial, and there was a black slave. I think from West Indies, Tituba. She testified, and they were like, she testified. How she testified? She's black. That was probably the first instance of a black person testifying and being allowed to testify. That was for the purpose of killing women as being witches, which is how it came about. But they let her testify, which was something that didn't happen. But because you couldn't testify, you didn't have the agency to go in front of a court or in front of a civilized world because you were inferior to the civilized world. You were less than. So we've grappled with that in this country. I'm not sure our brothers in the Caribbean have grappled the same way, but they were grappling with the idea that blacks were somehow less than. Now, keep in mind, during the civil rights movement throughout this country, our history, blacks have always been the most knowledgeable, the hardest working, and the doers. They were slaves. They did the work. That was their whole existence in this country, was to be workers. After slavery and Jim Crow, they were doing sharecroppers. They were the worker. They did the work. After Jim Crow, they moved up and they went to places like New York and Philadelphia. They would have race riots from immigrants from Europe because blacks were doing the work and they killed them to get their jobs and to success. When they had race riots, blacks were the ones who lost their jobs, and whites, whether it's from Scotland, Ireland, other places, came in and supplanted them. That's been the history, because you can supplant someone who's not as equal, right? It's someone who's less than, even though they have experience and they've been here and they're Americans, you can push them out the way and take their job. That's been the history of blacks in this country. So the idea, I don't think, was to concede that whites were in charge. The idea was the recognition that no, hold up. This has gone on way too long. We are human beings. We want to be treated as such. Now, the outcome of what they wanted and how they framed it gave the impression, and the reality is blacks are minorities. At that time, 30% of the population, they weren't taking anything over. They weren't coming to take over the government, and they had no leverage to get the government to do anything but to attack them. The mere fact that people like Dr. King was able to get leverage or get support because they came in humbly. We've only seen in this country, even now in most places around the world, where it's been blacks and minority, we've only seen blacks and minority succeed when they've been humble. An example, Dr. King is a huge figure in American history for whites and for blacks because he was humble. Mandela, same in South Africa, he was humble. He went to jail as a terrorist. He came out as someone who's humble, who's willing to give away the nuclear bombs and make peace, so they loved him. You only are seen as somebody who they're willing to work with if you're humble, and then they will address the issue you have. The reality is, we've seen, and whether academically or otherwise, there's been a constant push to seem and give the impression that blacks are inferior, and that's been the pushback.
Well, that's the problem with humility. What you refer to as humility is, in fact, in my judgment, an acknowledgement and acquiescence to the notion of innate and irreversible inferiority, white supremacy. That was the whole premise. And that is the battle. That is the issue that we have never confronted as a people.
I'm gonna push back. I don't think it's white supremacy. I think it's recognition of a position that you can't maintain. If you're in a war and you have 5 soldiers here and they have 95 soldiers here, you get the same guns, the same munition, you lined up face to face. The captain, the general of the 5 soldiers knows we're going to be annihilated. It's not a question. It's not, we make him fight harder. We make him get, for every one of us, we get 2. That's 10 people.
Well, but what that means is, if you follow that to its logical conclusion, that means whenever you believe that you are outnumbered, whenever you believe that the enemy has more strength than you, then automatically you concede and you.
No, not concede.
It is a concession.
And you can have it. Well, in war, it's a drastic example.
It's a surrender. It's a white flag. We surrender. We accept the fact that you are superior to us. So now, but nevertheless, you do have at least a moral obligation, since we're here, to help us survive.
No. So one, it's superior in different ways. So we accept the fact you have more people, not superior. So you said superior. I didn't. You have more people than we do. So we, in this example of blacks in this country, 33% of the population versus doing integration versus 80% or whatever number it was, they didn't have the numbers to get anything done. They number by number, they couldn't do things. They didn't have governments. How many mayors have we had in the country have been black? How many governors have we had that been black? How many senators have we had that have been black? So the government operates, and we have been, by and large, on the outside of that government. We've been on the outside. We have a couple who can get in. Places like New York, or places like Chicago, or places like Maryland, where they have a large black population, or in doing Reconstruction in the South. But by and large, we haven't been part of the government because we're too few.
Well, no, because we haven't chosen the people that are going to be in those positions of authority. We've allowed this so-called two-party system to tell us to pick our leaders for us. We've abandoned, the history. If you look at Baltimore City, there was a time when they had an organization called the Third District Metro Organization and the Fourth District Metro Organization, and you had Mr. Willie Adams involved, and Ray Haysbert and others that were involved. And those organizations help to not just to identify, to nurture, and to create, and even the program I mentioned, look at it this way, was part of that process, the Goon Squad. We don't have any of those organizations anymore, and we rely upon either the Republican or the Democratic Party to tell us who the leaders should be. Well, both of those organizations were created by white folks and are maintained and dominated by white folks. And if we've learned anything from history, is that neither Republicans or Democrats will ever put the interests of black folk at the head as a priority. So, look at Chuck Schumer's interest. I mean, every time, whenever white folk have a choice between their interest and our interest, their progress, what they believe to be is necessary for them and ours. Look how many wars we fought to come back and couldn't find a house or denied a mortgage. Look how many wars we fought and come back and couldn't get a job. Even with the VA preference, we could only get the most menial jobs because it never made a difference. Because at least in my opinion, we've never ever, as a people in recent times, faced head on this notion that what someone I read in an article the other day, some white guy said as a result of it during an altercation, I'm white, so that means I'm automatically better than you, just because I'm white. That is a premise that I think still controls the mindset of many people, black and white, by the way. That we still, in our community, we still believe that white folks' ice is colder. There's no question about it, at least in my opinion. And there's only one way to reconcile, to remedy that situation. Remember that slavery is itself an economic institution.
Yes.
So the only way to remedy a misappropriation of resources, a theft of opportunities, is with money. It's not perfect. It's not a perfect solution, but it's the only way to remedy it. That means the just compensation. That debt has to be paid. You can't keep kicking the can down the road.
So the point you're making, and we've had this discussion, you and I've talked to many brothers and sisters from the continent, and they have the same view on whites and blacks and about colonialism, about the idea that blacks think white ice is colder, whether they're in America, whether they're in Brazil, whether they're in Antigua, whether they're in Ghana or Nigeria. Depending on who we talk to, people may feel that way. Part of the show, it's still called The Board Watch until we actually change our name and have a more official name, is talk about business. And we talk about the way you make amends is economic. I agree. 100% I agree. My view is the way we can succeed as a people, but in general, we succeed by having the resources financially to get things done. When you have resources, and the reality is, quite as kept, resources are what get things done in politics as well. Businesses operate and do things based on people who have money. If Bill Ackman can make a phone call and say, do this, and I want you to fire the president of Harvard, it happened. Why? Because he's a billionaire. He has billionaire friends and people that moves the needle. We're in a capitalist country. Money talks every day, all day. We have, about 10, 20 black billionaires? I don't mean African American. I mean in the world. Maybe we don't know about a couple, or maybe it's 30 in total. Maybe 30. Out of all the black folks in the world, 30. We have the whole continent of Africa that we have sitting there. We have all the Caribbean. We have a good portion of South America. We have 30% or 40% of Americas. And we have throughout Europe. We have about 20, 30 people who are billionaires. And a good portion of those people are American blacks. Between American blacks and Nigerian blacks. That's the problem. We have to find a way to be able to bring more money into the community by black businesses and black development, to the point when we talk about tariffs, and I'm trying to make it full circle, talking about tariffs and what tariffs do. Tariffs are being seen by the administration as a tool to effect some kind of change. The way you survive a tariff for our community has to be, and we talk about this in the black community often, about dollars circulating throughout the community, about having $1 go from me to my black barber to his black dentist, from the black dentist to the black-owned supermarket. from the black-owned supermarket to the black employees, the black employees to the tutoring program for the black tutoring program for their kids. That's how you build business. That's how you build communities, by having self-sustain. Because once we have enough, and once any community, whether it's the Asian American community who are doing fine financially, whether it's the Southern Asian community, American community doing fine, whether the Hispanic community, or even Black community, once you have a base of a financial engine, all the things that we complain about, we can do for ourselves, and we've always had to do for ourselves. So in terms of schools, when we have a self-contained community, we can have our own schools. And historically, before Brown v. Board, we were segregated. The schools weren't as bad as they are now. I'm saying that as a person in 2025, I'm sure someone back then would say it would differ. But the schools now are still one gender school, one race schools. Blacks and whites still separated, and the black schools are typically not the best schools. I went to schools in Baltimore City at a time where they weren't very good. I went to some pretty poor. In real time, I saw them as being poor schools. We have to find a way to build an ecosystem in our community, so then you have power. You don't have power walking around and with rags on it and having it as a popper. When we have less, we treat it less. When we have more, we can get more. We can do more. That's one of the ways. One of the ways I think that we can improve our situation, even in light of tariffs. Your argument has been wage earners, that you need higher wages and you need more. We do need higher wages, but keep in mind, all the stats have shown you are more likely to hire a black person if the person hiring people is diverse, whether they're black or some other ethnicity. So we have to find ways to have more blacks owned businesses. Guess what? A black person will hire a black person. But they don't see a black person coming in and being afraid of them. They may. It could be black folks don't like black people. I'm sure they exist. It may, but by and large, more likely than not, if you're a black employee, you hire black employees. Not even that you're looking to hire black employees, because you don't have the same animus towards them as a non-black person we have.
Well, that's the thing. We've been taught to recognize the accomplishments or the money earned or the financial status of an individual and somehow equate that to the people, the group as a whole. Employment is the key. 99 and 9/10% of all people, if they're ever going to achieve financial stability in their lives, are going to achieve that by working for somebody else, not by owning a business, not by being an entrepreneur, but by working. So that the goal, in my mind, from the outset of advancing the interests of minority businesses, is not to make more black millionaires of the owners, is to allow the owner to hire more black people at salaries where they can sustain their family. That is the key. The key to civilization is the family. There's no question about it. And the key to the family is the stability of the ability of the people and to function as a unit. Now, if you remove any part of that unit, particularly if you remove the male by imprisonment or otherwise, the strength of the village, I'll borrow from Reverend P.M. Smith, the strength of the village is measured by the strength of its men. Well, a village has got no men, has no strength. So the incarceration of black people, which allowed Bill Clinton to get a second term, which Joe Biden supported when he was in the Senate, which is encouraged by the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery, with the one exception of prisons. Right? All of it is to diminish the functionality, the stability of the black family. That is where the focus has got to be, and that is why these programs. That is why any form of so-called economic development has got to focus on allowing black people to earn enough money to be. Now, when I say earn, I don't mean having to work 2 or 3 jobs, because if you're not in the house, you're not there to govern and to supervise your children. It makes a difference whether you're in jail or whether you work in a second job from a societal point of view. But from the point of view of that child, daddy ain't home. From the point of view of that child, mommy ain't home. That child's going to learn how to live some way. That child's going to become a part of a group. We're destined to be a part of an organization. And without proper supervision, that organization is probably going to be one that's detrimental to our development and evolution as a people. And that is so we have to, for example, when I said before, when a week ago or so, when Al Sharpton and others said, and Jamal Bryant all said, well, we're going to show solidarity by withholding our money from Target or Amazon or the other folks that have abolished the so-called DEI programs, which didn't primarily benefit black folk anyway. But we're gonna demolish those programs, get rid of those programs in cooperation with the White House. Well, you know, if we want to promote holding the money back from white business doesn't promote black business unless that's black business that can provide the same goods and services that the white business was going to provide. Holding it back for a month, if okay, so I'm not going to shop in Amazon for a month, but what am I going to do when that month's over? What about that's not going to break Amazon because they can wait it out. Jeff Bezos has more than enough money to wait that out. So we've got to develop we have had. That's the whole point. We had our communities that had economic stability, that had economic success. We had Black Wall Streets all over the country. And we got bamboozled by this notion because we were separate from white folk that we were inferior. So we promoted this idea of integration as a cure-all.
No, I can't co-sign it. I don't think any black person who's promoting integration felt it was inferior. Now, implicitly, you may say, well, that's what it's suggested. In real time, I'm not quite sure, and nothing that's suggested to me that any of them felt that way.
Well, Brown v. Board of Education held which was heralded, continued today. Thurgood Marshall that establishes as a legal principle that black institutions are inferior, and Thurgood Marshall argued that, and that's a black man. So you to say that we haven't accepted it, I can't accept it.
I'll say this. We argue black schools were inferior. Black schools weren't run by black people. Black schools were still owned by governments which were white. So none of those situations, we didn't at that time, we have HBCUs which are still run by governments. At the time we talking about Brown v. Board, the schools we had were schools given to blacks by the government, which was white. So we said black institution means places where everybody that was black, not that black ran, black owned, and black developed.
No, in 1954, the public schools that existed in my community weren't given to us by white people. They were schools that were developed because white people wouldn't allow us into their schools. I graduated. I'm from a small town on the Eastern Shore.
So the public schools in Salisbury were public schools by the state government. They weren't the blacks that get together, and there was some HBCU where they got together and made their own.
Well, it was no different than other public schools. Most of the white community school kids today and then went to public schools, but they were separate public schools.
Separate. So we said black institutions. It wasn't black in terms of black development. There were schools where they say, "All right, send your kids here." They still were government schools. These weren't. So we said black institutions. Something black means you own it and you develop it. Blacks didn't own those schools. None of the schools we talking about from Brown v. Board, what they were saying was we're giving sub-quality education to our students, and we have sub-quality books, sub-quality teachers, although I don't agree with that, and standards. They didn't say, so it's a nuance. It's nuance. Those schools weren't black and bad. Black, we didn't make the curriculum for those schools. Those were, everything that we did in those schools were given to the community by the state.
But everything in the white community was given by the state also.
Yes,
so the origin of the resources to create the separate institutions is not questioned. They all came from the government, and the government was under the management of white people at the time. But the thought was that because our school was 100% black and the white schools were 100% white, and they got more resources, that our schools were necessarily inferior. So when it came time to white kids weren't bused to black schools. Black kids were bused. It was other way around. So it was always the premise that what was white was better. I heard it said even from the pulpit of the church by the leader then of the youth ministry, who was announcing a summer intern program, and who said, "Listen, kids, I'm going to tell you about an opportunity for a summer program at Harvard." He said, and he said, "Look, I didn't say Howard, I said Harvard. So you got to pay particular attention, because I didn't say Howard, I said Harvard," which was, what's the message? What's the subliminal message there? The subliminal message is, no matter what the program is, you're better off getting it from Harvard than you are getting it from Howard. That reflects an innate acceptance of the notion of black inferiority, or conversely, white superiority. And that issue has never been confronted head on. We accepted it because we didn't think that we had the power to change it. And we acted accordingly. And that's the problem. That has to be that you have to draw the line somewhere. And when your humanity is at issue, you can't step back any further unless you're willing to jump off the cliff yourself. I'd rather stand, if I'm going to go off the cliff, I want to go fighting. I don't want to stand there and say, have somebody pushing me off. So we've got to, as a people, stop the notion of, we've got to abandon the notion of white folks' entitlement to be in charge. We've got to pick our own leaders. We've got to demand from the so-called parties, the major political parties, that no, you want our support? No, that we're not going to give our support to somebody you pick. If you want our support, you got to support somebody we pick. That's what Bernie Sanders is, an independent. Joe Lieberman from Connecticut was an independent. Yeah. So the notion that the two political parties will not recognize or support and don't need to support the so-called independent is specious. The only people that we say can't make it work for them are black people. Everybody else makes it work for them.
No, I'll say this. And to the point you're making, we differ on how we get to that point. I agree 100%. I do agree that we should have our own leaders. I do agree that we should build and we should demand things. The reason people want to do like Jamal Bryant and they want to withhold our money, similar to the Montgomery bus boycott, is the idea that we hold back until you do what we say do. So there is some inherent ability and power because we're in a capitalist country. Money talks. And that's the reality. So when you say we're not paying you, and unfortunately, which is a good thing and a bad thing, we spend a lot of money. We spend all our wealth on consumer goods. So the result, when we say, hey, we're not buying things, people actually do pay attention. I do like the idea of holding back, but I think you're right. I'm also in favor of, we set the terms of things. The issue that you're going to have is, even though, as you say, our kinfolks aren't kinfolks, but who you think should be a leader may not be who everybody thinks should be a leader. So you run up to the wall where in the past we have picked our leaders. The people we've had leading us have been picked by the people. Right. It doesn't mean that people you support. It may be somebody I support. So Dr. King is a huge example. He was supported by and large by the black community, but so was Malcolm X, and even though he had different ideologies. But so was it's a number of black politicians who were supported by the people, and they didn't do things the way you possibly want them to do them. That's why white politicians are supported by their community and they do things contrary. People say Trump. People say, I voted Trump. I thought he'll do this. I didn't think he'll go this far. But once you put someone up there, they will act in their own best interest. They may act in the community best interest, and you hope they do. It's not always the case. When they say power corrupts, it's a true statement. It corrupts ideas and it changes ideology in a way that you can't quantify. But in terms of building communities and making demands, I 100% agree. We have power not only in our dollar, but in our vote, in our organization, in our structure, in our infrastructure to do things, and we don't always hit the mark. And we have to. So where you say you're not looking to build more black billionaires or millionaires, you want to build more black employment. I see the only way you have more black employment is by having more black business owners. Because if we know for sure that black-owned business owners hire black people, then the best way to get more people hired is to have more black business owners. Now, at some point, it'll be an end to that. You can't have every person be a business owner. It's not sustainable, but you can develop and grow black businesses. Whether you grow an entertainment company that has 100,000 employees around the country, whether you grow a media company, or whether you grow construction companies. I mean, I'm in favor of growing businesses in general because I believe business is the way that minority communities can develop and grow their own communities. Everyone not meant to go to college, but doing a business and doing it well, you can contribute back to your community and as well as build up your community in a way that you couldn't do as an employee. And some people have a business mind. So I'm all in favor of helping. Hence, we help a lot of our clients, some are black, some aren't black, and build their businesses because I think it's worthwhile. It's helpful and it's a need. I don't care if you're a plumber and you're doing plumbing services around the state. That's a need for the community. Being a plumber as a business owner is much more profitable than working at Amazon.
How do black businesses survive the Trump era? I mean, by the Trump era, I mean, not just the dismantling of DEI or the Department of Education or the dismantling of the Minority Business Development Agency and the Department of Commerce, or even the shutdown of the SBA for all intents and purposes. How do you, in an economy where the government purchase of goods and services fuels every business, from Northrop Grumman to Lockheed to even Microsoft, and all of them, and certainly all of Elon Musk businesses. And I say that to say that the notion that the government that provides a lot of money to people who aren't eligible or entitled to it is erroneous, because every company that I just named is without government contracts, without government support, would be out of business. And I'll digress for just a second to remind people, Elon Musk has held now has been the world's richest man and all that. But the fact of the matter is, in 2009, Trump was bankrupt. I mean, Musk was bankrupt. Tesla was bankrupt. Tesla, as we know today, wouldn't exist if it hadn't been from a loan that was made under the auspices and with the approval of a black president. That was Barack Obama. He made a loan, an energy loan, to promote electric vehicles of $465 million to Elon Musk.
Observation. We may have to pick this up our next show. I will be brief. The way we succeed is pinning our ears back, being conservative and spending, and expand as much as possible. Now we're over hours, so we can talk more about this. That's a big conversation, a big question. That makes it take multiple shows, but it's an important question. It's an important endeavor for us to tackle. So with that, thank you for your time. It's been more than an hour. Hopefully I feel like this show has been a lot of back and forth, and as the tariffs come and as all these business interests come, it's bringing out more issues beyond business that we had to address. So hopefully you enjoyed. Certainly we are going through a name change. I think at the top of the show you mentioned a possibility of look at it this way, maybe another name. But any other names you guys have, send them in. We look at the change because the show will continue to grow beyond the board watch and beyond just looking at getting contracts in Baltimore City or in Maryland. We're looking towards a more global in terms of countrywide view as to business and development.
If you learn nothing more, you now know for sure lawyers can talk. See you next week.
Take
Bye-bye.
care, guys.